All right, my BIBLEin365 brothers and sisters, we have arrived at the book of Acts. Now, this is awesome because so many people call this the book of the Acts of the Apostles, when in reality, this is really a book of the Acts of the Holy Spirit. Now, I will tell you this, it is a remarkable book. It is a book that we can learn so much from, and there is so much to be said about the contents of this book. And I can tell you, what you learn from this book will radically change the course of your life if you allow it to. By the way, that's true of any Bible book, but this book, oh my goodness, this one is awesome. Now, we have to talk about where the book of Acts starts, and it starts with a very specific author who, by the way, is the only Gentile author that we know of in the New Testament. And I will say this about this man. This man was remarkable in what he actually put down for us and to give us. Remember, Luke was not only a physician, but he was a historian, and it is remarkable the type of things that he tells us that really gives us the ability to put together all of the things that we need to know about the movements and the actions of those that were in the early church, and there is a lot to be told. By the way, the book of Acts gives us the foundation of understanding with being able to develop a real sort of a grasp on how the Roman government maneuvered during that time. As a matter of fact, you get a very good grasp into the Roman criminal justice system. You get a good grasp into actually how their civil court system actually worked. And on top of that, you get a really good idea of what actually existed in that time. And through the recordings that you see in the book of Acts, you can actually establish not just really good chronology, but you can also establish the historicity of certain items, and you can undoubtedly establish what you need in order to do something like go on an archaeological dig. I'm not joking, folks. So many of the things that we see documented in the book of Acts have been the foundation for many of the finds that have actually incurred or been incurred in the Holy Land. And it is awesome when we see those things. Here's a great example of what I'm actually telling you. When you look at the story of Caesarea and you start learning about that city and you learn about what actually happened along the Mediterranean coast there, so much of what we have found in the modern day is based upon what we read in the record of Acts. As a matter of fact, when you go to Israel today and you look at the Roman aqueducts that are there along the Mediterranean and you begin to see the amphitheater that's there in Caesarea, you'll recognize very quickly that that was actually found based on somebody who looked at the biblical record, partially in Acts, to be able to develop an understanding of where this might be. And of course, what's even more interesting is through all of that, we actually find validation for what we already know is true. And that is the Bible's mention of Pontius Pilate. In that area is where we actually find record that gives us evidence that Pontius Pilate was real. Matter of fact, there's a lot of people during this time or up until this time that actually debated whether or not that was even a real character, because even Roman records don't do justice the kind of information that the biblical record actually does. And quite frankly, we can learn a lot more about ancient Rome through the Bible than we can actually through ancient Roman records. It's kind of funny how that works. Although I will tell you that there were some great historians that contribute to our understanding of the Roman world. Philo or Josephus, they both are great when it comes to understanding some of this stuff, and they really bring it along with the patterns that we see established in Bible history. So we learn a lot here. By the way, we learn a lot about the apostles. We learn a lot about the gifts of the Holy Spirit. We learn about how the Holy Spirit actually works. We are given a great indicator of the things that we ought to be doing within the context of the church and the things that we ought not to be doing. One of my favorite sections in the book of Acts is when Paul addresses the Ephesian elders and he gives them some final warnings. Another one of my favorite passages is, of course, when he goes before Felix and Festus and eventually ends up going before Caesar. We learn so much about how to preach the gospel from that. Speaking of preaching the gospel, When Paul in Acts chapter 17 ends up in Mars Hill, and we learn about an extraordinary group of people called the Bereans. It gives us a great understanding of how we ought to look at the Bible. And there is so much more that we can learn in the book of Acts. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest accounts of Jewish history that I have ever read with respect to something that was orated by a single individual would be the story that we read early on concerning the nation's history through a person like Stephen. Stephen was remarkably skilled. He was very talented. He had a very good, deep understanding of Jewish history, especially as it relates to what we read about in the Bible. And he takes this powerful message that he brings, and he really brings to the table what the real core of the issue was with the spiritual leaders in that day. So we learn a lot about that. We see the miraculous works of the Holy Spirit. Acts serves as a remarkable book that shows us that those gifts are available to us today. We see the remarkable actions of somebody like Peter. We see the amazing story about Paul, and we learn so much more about so many people during that time. And the book of Acts does something really cool. The book of Acts gives us a better foundation to understand many of the letters that were actually written. For example, when you learn about the letters that were written to the church in Corinth, when you read about Paul's letter to the church in Rome, when you look at his letter to Philemon, or when you look at the letter that is written to the church in Ephesus or to Timothy on multiple occasions, or the Thessalonian church, when you read about all of these letters, the book of Acts gives you remarkable insight into the foundation where these churches actually were during that time. And by the way, this also extends to the writings of John. When you actually look at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, when you look at the book of Revelation, you can really develop a good, solid understanding of all of the churches, even in the book of Revelation, chapter 2, all the way through chapter 3, when we read the 7 letters to the 7 churches, so much of the foundation that you would need to know or have established, historically speaking, regarding those churches are going to be found in the book of Acts. So Acts is a great foundation base. It gives us a really good understanding. If you don't like geography, you'll end up liking it after you look at the book of Acts. And I will tell you this, I want to encourage you to use the book of Acts in 4 different ways. And it's really important that you note these 4 different ways, because these 4 different ways will change your life. Number 1, I want you to look at the book of Acts as the source of inspiration to show you and demonstrate to you the works of the Holy Spirit. What he does back then is exactly what he does today. That the Holy Spirit is still one who desires to move in your life the same way he moved in the lives of all of those people. So it should inspire you to trust in the Lord, especially through the empowering of the Holy Spirit. The second thing that the book of Acts needs to be to you is a phenomenal historical document. It proves a very, very, very great value in simply establishing the historicity of the Bible. The third thing that it should do for you is it should be an absolutely go-to place when it comes to reference material. You should treat the book of Acts as a reference tool, like you would treat a encyclopedia or you would treat a dictionary. The book of Acts is good for that because it gives you some really good understanding about things that you might not be aware of if you did not go to it to learn and understand. The fourth thing that the book of Acts should do is the book of Acts should teach you how to preach the gospel. If you are looking for a manual on how to preach the gospel, the book of Acts is where you go to find it. You will get it there, and it's awesome. By the way, it teaches you about things like the baptism of the Holy Spirit, which if you've never been baptized by the Holy Spirit, it's different than water baptism. You need to look into that. It will show you how to rely upon the power of the Holy Spirit to give you the ability to do the things that you do. It will emphasize principles like truth and justice, relying upon the strength of God, listening to God's voice. Any of those themes that you might need to know or understand, you will find in the book of Acts. So there you have it, folks. It's astoundingly amazing stuff. I want you to be encouraged by it. Invest in it. It's great stuff. All right. God bless you guys.